A distinct language can give people a strong cultural identity, but it can also isolate them from others who don't speak it. And Chinese is the perfect example of that. China has a bigger population than any other country. Chinese people outnumber Americans 4-1, even though both countries are roughly the same size. And as a result, Mandarin Chinese, or Standard Chinese, has more native speakers than any other language. More than all the native speakers of Spanish and English combined. But if we also include the people who speak any of these languages as a second language, a different picture emerges. The number of English speakers grows with almost 1 billion, while the number of Mandarin Chinese speakers grows with only 200 million. And most of those 200 million are just Chinese people whose first language is a regional version of Chinese, like Cantonese. In other words, 1 billion people outside the US have easy access to American culture, while Chinese culture remains a mystery to almost everyone outside of China. But today, I'm gonna take a small part of that mystery away by giving you an inside look into the Chinese language. The most distinctive feature of that language is obviously the characters. They have been around for over 3,000 years, but they've changed a lot over time and there have been various competing scripts. The script that's in use today has been dominant for the past 1400 years, give or take. But just like in other parts of the world, the average person wasn't literate. It's estimated that by the late 19th century, only 30-45% of Chinese men and only 2-10% of Chinese women had some degree of literacy. And a lot of those people weren't fully literate. For example, they might have known the characters they needed to read a calendar or keep track of inventory, but they couldn't read a book or a legal document. And because they mainly wrote in informal settings, they often used simplified versions of characters that were easier to write and easier to remember than the official ones. Enter this guy, Louis Kuei. Born in 1886 to upper-class parents, he was not only taught to read and write in Chinese, but he also studied English and Japanese. So he was a man of the world. He became a major figure in education and publishing, and he believed that the way to get the literacy rate up was to embrace simplified characters. In 1909, he made the case that the education system should adopt the simplified characters that were already in use. And later he also proposed to systematically simplify many of the other characters. He was the first person to suggest this. Now, at the time, a lot of Chinese intellectuals believed that China needed to modernize. So this idea gained traction. Some people, like this famous author, Lu Xun, even started saying that China should stop using characters altogether. There were some practical reasons not to do that, which I will get into in a bit, but the idea to simplify the characters remained popular. The communists took over in 1949, after both of these gentlemen had already died, and they were the ones who officially implemented it in the 50s and 60s. Now, we gotta differentiate between mainland China and Greater China. Mainland China is this area. 98% of people who speak Chinese live here. This is where the communists took over, so this is where they switched to simplified characters. Greater China includes mainland China, but it also includes Macau, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. Those areas were not controlled by the communists, so they didn't switch to simplified characters. They are still using traditional characters. I should also mention that Chinese characters have been used to write down other languages as well, like Vietnamese and Korean. But the Vietnamese switched to a variation of the alphabet that looks like this. They used a lot of so-called diacritics. And the Koreans developed their own Korean alphabet, which looks like this. It's easily recognizable by the many circles. There are no circles in Chinese characters. The only other language that still uses Chinese characters is Japanese. They integrated the characters fully into their script. But they also simplified many of them, and not always in the same way as in mainland China. For example, this is a traditional Chinese character that means picture. The simplified Chinese version looks like this, and the Japanese version looks like this. So there is overlap, but knowing one of these scripts only gets you halfway to understanding the others. To keep things simple, I'm gonna explain how characters work using only simplified Chinese characters and Mandarin Chinese pronunciations. Essentially, a character is a syllable with meaning. That's all it is. And we're not just talking about random shapes and sounds, there's a lot of internal logic. Let me show you. The characters that are easiest to understand are pictograms. They're basically stylized, simplified pictures of what they represent. For example, this character means person, this one means fire, and this one means tree. There are also characters that do the same, but with abstract concepts. For example, this character means up, this one means down, and this one means middle. And there are compound characters with meanings that are easy to understand if you know the original characters. For example, this is the character for tree again, twice. If you combine them into one character, you get the character for forest. Or take this one. This character means sun, and this character means moon. Combine them into one, and you get the character for bright. And one more example, this character means woman, and this one means sun. Add them together, and you get the character for good. A lot of characters also incorporate another character with the same pronunciation. For example, here's the character for middle again. It's pronounced chong. And as you can see, it's featured in these other characters. Here, here, and here. Because all of these characters share its pronunciation. Or look at this character. It's pronounced ba. These characters all incorporated. Here, here, and here. And they too share its pronunciation. And final example, this character is pronounced ma. These characters all feature it and share its pronunciation. The other parts of the characters give you more information about their meaning, by the way. For instance, this one includes a woman because it's the character for mom. This little square here means mouth. It's included here because this character is used at the end of a question. And this here means stone. It's included because the character represents weight and numbers. Like any other language, it's not an exact science. Some characters are more logical than others. But I hope you see that they're far from random. There's a system to it, and that's what makes it possible to learn thousands of them. Any educated Chinese person knows at least 3,000 characters. If you want to understand what that's like, picture an isolated town with 3,000 people. That's a small town. If you grow up in a town like that, you know everyone. You see some people more often than others, but none of them are strangers to you, because you keep bumping into them and they're all connected in one way or another. Learning 3,000 characters works pretty much the same way. So, it's doable, and people are doing it. Quite a lot of people actually. But still, wouldn't switching to the alphabet be easier, you ask? Well, not necessarily. I mean, this is what the previous slides look like without the characters. The pronunciation is clear, but the meaning is completely lost. And that's just a small selection of so-called homophones, characters that sound the same. Chinese has a lot of them. There's even a famous 1930s poem written by this guy, the linguist Zhao Yuanren, to demonstrate this. In English, the poem is called Lion-Eating Poet in the Stone Den. It looks like this. These are all commonly used characters, and if you're literate in Chinese, then you can read and understand it. Now, let's look at the pronunciation while we listen to it. Okay, I think that's enough. You get it. Chinese has a lot of homophones. So how do Chinese people actually talk to each other without constantly being confused about what everyone is saying? Well, the Chinese language compensates for homophones in 3 ways. Number 1. Tones. If you've been paying attention, you've noticed accents on the pronunciations. Those accents indicate in which tone a character is supposed to be pronounced. Mandarin Chinese has 4 tones. The first tone is high and level. The second tone rises. The third tone falls and then rises. And the fourth tone just falls. So, these 4 characters in the title of the poem are actually pronounced in slightly different ways. Listen closely.
诗时始是
Of course, this is just a natural part of the language and not something native speakers need to actively think about. In the same way that you speak English without actively thinking about intonation. You just know how words are supposed to sound. But for people learning Chinese as a foreign language, tones are a big deal. Number 2, classifiers. In English, when we talk about certain objects, we use measure words. For example, we say 2 loaves of bread or 4 bars of chocolate. We don't just say 2 bread, because then it's not clear if we're talking about loaves or slices. But when we're talking about things that only come in full units, we don't use any extra words. We just say 2 flowers, 3 cars, or 4 people. In Chinese, you always use one of those words, no matter what you're talking about. And they're called classifiers because they specify which category of things you're referring to. So a flower is 一朵花, a car is 一辆车, and a person is 一个人. These are the classifiers. They're all different and they're really just there to confirm that we're indeed talking about a flower, a car, and a person. Number 3. Multi-character words. So far we focused on individual characters, but the Chinese language doesn't actually have a different character for every single word. In fact, most Chinese words consist of 2 or more characters. And naturally, longer words sound more unique and are less likely to be homophones of other words. And because every character has its own meaning, a lot of these words just combine 2 concepts in the simplest way possible. Think of how the English words play and ground make up the word playground. That's how a lot of Chinese words are constructed. For example, this is a hand machine, an ear machine, a make fire machine, a receive sound machine, a warm air machine, a cut grass machine, a flying machine, and a push earth machine. Some Chinese words are a lot more creative than that though. For instance, the Chinese word for faucet is water dragon head. And what do you think of these animal names? Big mouth bird, 8-claw fish, river horse, wall tiger, sea elephant, color changing dragon, pouch mouse, big bear cat, dragon shrimp, and cat-head hawk. A lot of characters have more than one meaning, so they can be used differently in different words. And there are also words where the meaning of the characters doesn't matter at all, and it's all about the pronunciation. This is especially true for loan words, foreign geographical names, and names of foreigners. Chinese doesn't have that many loan words, but it has a few. These words are just written in Chinese characters that kinda, sorta, approximate the original words. For example, coffee is 咖啡, bikini is 比基尼, and sofa is 沙发. The same goes for foreign geographical names. Chinese geographical names have meaning. Beijing means northern capital, Nanjing means southern capital, and Shanghai means on the sea. Every name on the map tells you something. But the names of foreign places and countries are just based on sound. The Chinese word for country is guo, so America is 美国, and England is 英国. They did make sure to pick characters with positive connotations though. So literally translated, America is beautiful country and England is hero country. Many other countries have purely phonetic names. Australia is Audaria, Canada is Janada, and Portugal is Putauia. Fun fact, the literal translation of the last one is grape tooth. The same goes for the names of people. Every Chinese person has a name that means something, but that's not the case for foreigners. So when Chinese people write about foreigners, they use pretty neutral characters to write down their names phonetically. In China, this man is not called Joe Biden. His name is Qiao Baideng. If you live in China or spend any significant amount of time there, people expect you to have a Chinese name. You can use the generic phonetic version of your name, but you can also pick a completely different name. Anything goes, really. Personally, I like having a name that sounds similar but also carries meaning. So outside of China, my name is Robin. In China, my name is Luo Bin. In China, the family name comes first, and Luo is a common Chinese family name. This character Bin is a combination of these characters, which loosely translate to culture and combat. You know, the pen and the sword. It's a really profound character, but I actually got it from a children's book. This one, to be precise, which I have to say was not my favorite. If you ever want to read a Chinese children's book, I recommend this one and this one. And if you're feeling more like an adult, then I strongly recommend this series. So, there are disadvantages, but also advantages to using characters. And there's one last advantage that I haven't mentioned yet, and it's a big one. Chinese has no verb conjugations. You know how in English even basic verbs like to be come in 8 different varieties? I am, you are, he is, I was, you were, she will be, they have been, and you are being. None of that shit exists in Chinese. There is one word for to be, and it's sure. This character here is all you need. I am, you am, he am, I am yesterday, you am yesterday, and she will am tomorrow. That's how things are said in Chinese. We're not conjugating a damn thing. Every verb has one form, and it works just fine. Now, one final question you might have about characters is how people enter them into phones and computers. A lot of people are puzzled by this, but it's actually really simple. Throughout this video, every time I show the pronunciation of a character, I used a system called pinyin. This system was actually developed by Chinese people for Chinese people. In particular, you can thank this guy for it. Zhou Youguang. Fun fact about Zhou Youguang, he lived to be 111. He was born in 1906 and only died in 2017. But yeah, he made typing in Chinese really easy. If you want to type Chinese characters, just set your keyboard to input pinyin. You type exactly what you want to say and the characters will appear on your screen. Just confirm that the characters are correct and Bob's your uncle. There are other systems as well, some people prefer those. And of course, touchscreen has made it possible to write characters directly on your phone. But pinyin is faster. Now you know everything a non-Chinese speaker should know about Mandarin Chinese. And with this basis, it's easy to understand the difference between Mandarin and other versions of Chinese. Characters have been around for millennia, but the same can be said for telephones, radios, and TVs. For most of China's history, people in different parts of the country could communicate with each other through characters, but they didn't hear each other speak. So over time, they started pronouncing characters differently. This has resulted in hundreds of different local varieties of Chinese, many of which are not mutually intelligible. This map shows the primary branches of Chinese. As you can see, there's more variety in the southeast than in the north. That's because that part of the country is more mountainous, so people live more isolated. Today, about 2/3 of Chinese people speak Mandarin as their first language. The other third speaks one of the many other varieties. Because they use the same characters, these are not completely different languages. People who speak one might not be able to talk to people who speak another, but they can read the same books and message each other without any difficulty. You can compare it to numbers and math. This equation is pronounced differently in every language. You think the answer is 3, someone in Spain thinks it's tres. But you can both read it and understand it. In the same way, everyone in China can read this. Someone who speaks Cantonese might write it like this, and someone who speaks Hakka might write it like this. But the differences in writing are minor. When you ask them to pronounce it, however, you get this.
我是一個學生，我係一個學生，我係一隻學生。
Because it's really inconvenient when people in the same country can't talk to each other, there have been consistent efforts to get everyone to learn Mandarin. And those efforts have been successful. China's entire education system is in Mandarin, and everyone recognizes its importance. Many people still keep their local varieties alive, but they switch to Mandarin whenever they have to. 好了，今天的视频就是这些，希望对你有所帮助。如果你喜欢的话，请点个赞再走吧。我们下次再见。